Hello, everybody. All right. Welcome. I am Tim. Today I have Cecilia with me. Cecilia Hendricks is a long time and only consistent guest of my YouTube channel. She's the ex-moderator of the Neville subreddit, and we've done several very formal interviews before. We haven't done one in a while because Cecilia started her own podcast and YouTube channel and doing her own website and offering stuff a couple months ago. And she's been super busy, super productive, and super helpful with some of the stuff she shared. So I'm thrilled to have Cecilia back on. Cecilia, how are you?
I am wonderful, thank you. I
All
always
right.
love coming on here, so I appreciate that you keep having me back. So I do really enjoy these chats. I appreciate it.
Of course, if we're going to have guests, we're going to have you.
Thank you.
And yeah, first of all, for people who are new here, you can look at some of Cecilia and my previous chats. I'll put the link somewhere in the description and above. But also be sure to check out Cecilia's YouTube channel as well as her podcast, because if you like Neville and like these ideas, Cecilia is one of the few people that I know of on social media who actually discusses this stuff in an interesting way with like her own unique angle, which is pretty unusual. And so, yeah, I wanted to have you on to actually discuss a couple kind of specific things, but also because I've been, I think you know this, Cecilia, I've been bashing the Neville online community more
I have
than
seen,
usual. Yeah, the
yes.
last couple of weeks, it's been pretty brutal. And I just want to show people that that's not all that we discuss or all that I discuss when it comes to Neville, and that occasionally we have some new insights into his teachings or some interesting takes. In all seriousness, one reason that I think both Cecilia and I tend to be critical of the Neville online community is because we both benefited from his teaching so much, and consistently have tried to explore different ways of looking at his advice that's a little bit more out of the box than what we're used to hearing. And we were texting last week, and Cecilia was mentioning something that she often talks about that I think is very, very profound, and that I think you just talk about better than anybody, and that is states, because states is a very big term for a lot of us, including me. When I hear states, usually when Neville talk about states, I get confused sometimes, or I don't know what that means.
Right.
But Cecilia, you were saying, and I've heard you say this before, but I always am struck by it, how you are compelled to act from the state that you are in. You're
Right.
compelled to act from the state that you are in. So I was hoping you could just expand upon that some today with viewers and listeners, because it's one of the more profound parts of Neville's philosophy and approach, I think.
Well, and I think it's one that's kind of missed, or people don't think about as much, or they don't
Yes.
consider as much, and myself included, right? Like I kind of had this epiphany moment, which are my favorites, and I believe are like God kind of slapping me in the back of the head, like, hey, pay attention here. But that epiphany came from the fact of, okay, well, if I'm considering that I am now in this state, like we could use the state of being loved, right? And I feel love and I feel cherished by somebody, and I feel like we have this most remarkable relationship and we're totally in love and everything's fantastic. Well, if I feel that way and I'm actually in that state, that is natural for me, I feel like that's the person that I am, that's how I am identifying, then I wouldn't do some of these other habits that I would feel compelled to do. I wouldn't even have that compulsion to do that. And it kind of hit me, like one of them was, somebody, I think it was back on Reddit, where somebody was messaging me and they're like, well, I can't stop checking their Instagram to see if they're out with somebody else. And I thought about myself and like my own spouse, and I don't go check his Instagram to find out if he's like out with somebody. Yeah, it's not something that I'm compelled to do. Like I might be compelled to reach out to them. I might be compelled to think something nicely about them or consider like, oh, maybe I'll run to the store and pick them up, their favorite potato chip or something. I don't know. I'm thinking potato chips. I'm hungry. But so, there might be something that comes from that. But my compulsion would not be to go check their Instagram. It wouldn't be to drive by their house. It wouldn't be to do like to call them and hang up on them. And it wouldn't be to check to see if they've unblocked me on social media channels. And so it just hit me in that point that you are always acting from whatever state you're in. And your state is like kind of not only where you dwell, but the identity that you have of yourself and the way that you view yourself and the way you think about yourself. But it goes so much more that you can use that as like an educational piece to figure out where you are and like what you're actually thinking and what your true belief is. Because you can pair it to yourself, all day long that you are loved or you are wealthy or you are healthy or whatever. But if you're still being compelled to do these things and you still have this desire to act out in this way that is not in alignment with the state that you either are convincing yourself you're in or attempting to move into, you're not there. Like your behaviors and your thoughts and everything is all stemmed from the state that you're in. And that was just kind of like this eye-opening moment for me of being like, oh, holy crap, this is really where this comes from. It's all from your state. My behavior now as like a mother is different than something that I would have been compelled to do when I was, a teenager. Like these are different things because I'm a different identity now. So that was kind of where that came from. But yeah, if you think that somebody's in love with you, you're not checking their socials or driving by their house or stalking them.
Speak for yourself. Just
I
just
know
kidding.
I should talk to your wife and check on her.
Right. I'm always checking where Kate is at all times.
Yeah.
Just kidding, folks. No, I mean that getting extremely serious. I mean, yeah, that's it. Like that's like a large part of Neville's teaching in a nutshell.
Right.
I think it's something we have to be reminded of again and again and again, because it's not, I made a video the other day, like talking about like blanket statements and catchphrases. It's not like, everybody is you pushed out or something cool sounding or whatever, but it's like, what is my predominant state I'm operating from? Because my actions and behavior are being dictated from that state. And it can be very sobering, I think, because we might have a desired state that we want to be in and that we're trying to assume. But then if we, objectively look at our behavior, and we're not overly self-critical when we do this, but if we, try to step back and look, we realize, my God, I'm not even close. I'm not even close to my behavior. My day's behavior was not at all aligned with the person I'm aspiring and assuming that I am.
Right.
It's like there's a huge gap a lot of the time. Yeah.
And it does take a certain level of like self-awareness and not, to your point, not beating yourself up. I actually filmed a bonus like podcast episode launched this morning that talks exactly about this, which was on accident for our conversation and kind of the direction that we're going, which I love when that happens. But it's all about the way that you like. So the question that I always tell my followers to ask themselves is, how do I want to feel when I go to bed? So when I go to bed tonight, if I was my ideal self and I was living this ideal life, even if it's just for this specific piece, this certain area of my life, how do I want to feel when I go to bed? And then ask yourself throughout the day, well, am I doing in alignment with that? Like, is this, am I misaligned? Is my thoughts misaligned? And the more curious you get about yourself, the better. It's not about beating yourself up. It's not about never thinking a negative thought. It's never about never getting annoyed with somebody or this like toxic positivity bullshit that's everywhere. It's about being honest with yourself. And the more honest you can be, the more you become aware of it, and then the more that you can change it. Everything that we have is a habit. And I was going to say, like, it was fantastic that you reminded me of this Neville quote from the fourth, it's actually, oh, it's from lesson 3 of his 5 lessons, thinking fourth dimensionally. So, and I had totally forgotten about this, but it says, the only reason you and I are functioning as we are today and are not aware of the greater outlook is simply because we are creatures of habit. And habit renders us totally blind to what otherwise we should see, but habit is not law. It acts as though it were the most compelling force in the world, yet it is not law. So you can change these habits that you're in. You can change these beliefs that you have and your focus and where you're dwelling, but you can't do it unless you are honest with yourself that you need to, and you're honest with yourself about the areas that you need to do it in. And you're just like self-aware enough to say, yeah, you know what? If I've been doing this and trying to get something for the past 5 years and all I'm feeling is frustration and I'm getting upset with myself, I'm sorry, you're not in that state. It's not that it's not working. It's not that you're just not, it's not that you're like not necessarily doing it right, because you are doing it right. You're just doing it right for the wrong thing. So it always works, but what you're getting mirrored back is your frustration and the fact that you are not that person. Your belief is not aligned to that. It's very simple, but it can also be relatively difficult, just like as a human being, to learn how to focus, but you can change it.
Yeah, I think it's a lifelong practice. And
Oh
again,
yeah.
it's, if you want to get Neville sounding about it, like, every state is perfect in and of itself, right? It's just you're reflecting whatever state you're in. We can interpret that very literally or more,
Right.
metaphorically, but it's so much. I mean, the reason that Neville talks about the power of awareness is exactly because of this, is because if
Hmm.
you do have the power through awareness to change your habitual state, to change your
Agreed.
habitual thought patterns, your habitual feelings from your thoughts, and
Hmm.
how all that stuff works. And that's yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what you could call the work of doing this stuff, and it's I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I don't think it's just doing sats that does this. Obviously, not obviously, but many people who have listened to our other conversations know that we're both a big fan of the 95-5 code by Richard
Right.
Dodds. And that whole book is about how it's not about your techniques. Like, let's, for instance, say like sats, or, I don't know, something about, saying, isn't it wonderful, over and over again, or
Yeah.
whatever. It's not about that it necessarily, as much as it's about the other 95% plus of the day, how you're living your life the rest of the day. What state are you coming from the rest of the day? In my opinion, the great Neville techniques, as amazing as they are, like sats, for instance, like sleeping in the wish fulfilled, it's to then make it so you're operating from that fulfilled state the rest of your waking hours, the other 95% of your day. That incredible technique spurs on, your behavior for the rest of the day, or at least for a significant portion of the day. So your state, that your desired state becomes more of a permanent thing, as opposed to doing a technique and feeling good while you're doing a technique, but not really feeling it all that much as you're going about the rest of your day after day.
Or
Um,
squashing it.
well, that's what
Like,
we usually do, is squash it. Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
like they just like kill it.
I was trying to be
Um,
kind, but yes, you're right. They do the opposite of they're, yeah, they're not in the wish
and
fulfilled. They're in the lackful state of not having it.
and here's like the great part, I think, of this, like, change your perspective, right? Because the the fact that you can do that way means you can do it the other way. So the fact that you can squash the good one with your focus for the rest of the day and kind of like stomp out that seed, and it's not about digging it up and looking at it, and that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, like, if you go to bed feeling a certain way, but not really, you're just kind of like forcing yourself and going
Right.
through these
Because if you,
motions.
it's automatic. If you feel good, if you really
Yes,
do it, it automatically spurs you on. Right. But if you're
right.
forcing it, sorry, but yeah, just
No, no,
wanted
no,
to,
no,
yeah.
totally go. It's one of those things where it's like, sorry, I'm trying to find, there was a piece that I was going to read, but I can't find it. So, you, like, if you can do it that way, you can do it the other way, right? Like, even if you have, this is what I tell folks too, stop beating yourself up, stop getting frustrated with yourself, and stop thinking you're not allowed to think negative. Stop, just look at it as a learning experience of where you are now. Say, this isn't where I want to be. So these are the steps that I'm going to take to actually change this habitual thought, the way that I'm viewing life, start to kind of recognize things and do more that I enjoy so that the rest of my time is more in alignment with this person. Because if you are naturally feeling like you're a person who's loved and desired and wealthy or happy or joyful or healthy or whatever it is, during the day, you are not sitting on your couch upset that somebody has a picture with somebody that you don't know on Instagram. And I'm using that as an example because it's one that I get like from people. Well, I checked and they have this person, that they were out with, and I don't know who that person is. And it's like, well, who cares? Like, you would not be doing this if you felt the way about yourself that you think that you feel,
Right.
and you would not lash out at them and you would not be frustrated with them. And it's a very natural movement when you do start to pay attention to it. And I think a lot of people get, they think, and I did the same thing, where you think with these techniques that it's like, well, it's going to be immediate, right? Like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to be like, damn, my life is fantastic. And when that doesn't happen, it's frustrating. Well, you're so focused on this specific event and this specific thing, you're not able to see even the bigger picture of what you're like actually feeling. And I know it's frustrating. I've been there. I've had the frustration. But the more that you're able to break it up and start paying attention to the way you're spending your day, start taking a look at your behaviors, start more embodying the person that you want to be with super small, sustainable steps, and the closer you get to it, the more stuff like starts to happen. That's been my experience, and some people that I've like worked with and sent information to have shared feedback with me the same, that they have found that you just, once you take out this feeling that it needs to happen within 5 seconds of doing the technique, and instead you are actually just enjoying your life within that time because um, you're so confident in the fact that it's going to happen. I'm not saying you can't have the specific things. I believe that completely, but you're so confident that that's going to happen. You just feel good. And I think that's what vibration is about. Like, I know that the Neville community doesn't necessarily like to talk about vibrations, but Neville Goddard has as well. You do vibrate to attract things into your life. It's not that you have to always think positively to have those. I don't agree with that, but you have to be a match for stuff. You don't get what you want, you get what you believe. And I do think that's like some sort of vibrational match, but not like vibrate like if I were to hit metal or something. So I think that's where kind of confusion comes in. Sorry, my
Yeah.
rambles.
No, no, no. I mean, we don't need to debate. The people who think the law of assumption and what Neville's talking about is different than all this other manifesting stuff, this isn't the right channel or conversation for them. I mean, just to be blunt.
Or maybe it is, and then
Or
they'll
maybe
have
it
an
is.
awakening.
Yeah.
Because it's all the same. People
It's
say it in different ways. They
yeah.
have
I
different
mean,
techniques,
even
but
if
it's
it's
all the
not
same.
all the same, and I very, Cecilia, I very fully think it's all the same. But even if it's not, there's
Mhm.
at least the 90% crossover.
Right. Enough
Um,
for it to be enough.
helpful,
Yeah.
enough for other stuff to be helpful for you,
Right.
probably to hear. I also think of that Carl Rogers quote. I'm going to paraphrase it here. It's only when I accept fully as I am that I'm able to change.
Right.
Um, it might not seem relevant in regards to what Neville talks about, but it's more like when you're at peace with what you are, then you're more willing to uh, to change, to shift your
Yeah.
reality. And it's like when you try to push against what you are right now, which is what we do when we're looking to see what the other person is doing or wondering why it hasn't showed up yet or why this hasn't changed. When we're doing that, it's much harder to change for your reality, your external reality change, than when you're just okay with what's happening and expecting it to change. Something else that seems relevant, and it might not be relevant, but it's like, I do think an issue with some of Neville's advice sometimes is, assuming the state is vague It's sometimes he's kind of vague about how to do that. And I think what we're talking about now is his way of being specific, is like basically you can check in with yourself. What state am I being compelled to act from? You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, do you know what I mean by vague? I mean, just like when I hear like, so for instance, especially because, you know, we had that conversation a few months ago about how Neville was saying, especially at the end of his career, how he would just assume something once and assume it was going to happen. While, you know, quote unquote, traditionally, like a lot of people interpret it like in the Law and the Promise, how you fall asleep in sats, for instance,
Right.
night after night to kind of really imbue yourself. But especially if you just assume something once and feel it real, and then that's it, you know, how are you supposed to then walk in that feeling until the thing happens in the 3D? Because it's not, you know, Neville didn't say, well, I assume it real, it's going to happen overnight or happen in 3 days. I mean, he just said it's going to happen if you feel
Yeah.
it's going to happen. So how do you know that time interval while you go through the bridge of incidents, how do you assume it as being such? I think what we're discussing now is a good way of doing that, which is checking in with yourself and asking yourself, you know, what state am I coming from right now? What's compelling me to act?
Well, and I think beyond that, here's where the conundrum is. The more that you're trying to mimic the way that somebody else tells you it is to live in the state fulfilled, the more that you're just tricking yourself. You're actually convincing yourself more that it's not here. And this was this like huge eye-opening moment for me. And it was because I had a couple things that shifted without me realizing that they did, like a few years ago. And all of a sudden it was literally like I woke up one day and I'm like, holy shit, like this has come into my world now. Like this is here for me. And I don't it just happened.
Right.
Right. And like it's here. And how did I get here? And so when I started to like kind of reverse engineer to how I got there, it was just deciding like, okay, I'm going to start checking in. Am I actually here within this state? I'm going to start doing things that I actually enjoy in life instead of being so focused on this thing that I feel like I don't have. And so when you're trying to mimic, like, okay, well, then tell me exactly what you felt, and then you're trying to force that feeling. It's like fake gratitude, which I did for a long time because I didn't quite understand what the feeling of gratitude was that people were describing to have this like natural feeling of what they had. And so I would take stuff and do this like gratitude journal and like write stuff out and try to like force this feeling of like gratitude for it. And I was like, well, I'm not getting anywhere with this. Like, this is not working for me. And it's because it is. It's fake gratitude. It's toxic positivity. And instead, if you just look and it's like, what do I actually enjoy doing? Like, what brings me joy? It's not sitting on my couch moping that I don't have XYZ thing. So I really just kind of was like, F it. I'm going to go do things that I like. I'm going to do things that make me feel good. I'm going to do things that make me feel fulfilled for myself. And then it was like, holy shit, now it's all happening and it's happening quickly. And it's because you let go. Like when people talk about letting go, it's not, that's also not a forced one of like, oh, I've let him go and I don't care what he does anymore and I'm over it. And I've had, people that will tell me like, well, I've let my SP go, I don't care. And then maybe they'll have a success in something else. And then they're like, well, I've decided just to try this one more time. I'm like, well, then you never really let go. And it's fine to still love someone. It's fine to still have these feelings of kind of, in my opinion, want for something. But when you do this shift to actually enjoy your life, like you're not convincing somebody outside of yourself what you want. You're convincing like your own subconscious. Like I'm not trying to tell you exactly what I want to make sure I get it in that exact same way. And if I don't write it perfectly, or if I use a negative word instead of a positive word, it's not going to happen for me. It's not about that. Like it's about figuring out how to not only accept like where you are now, because I can say, yes, I love where I am now. There's things that I want to be different. There's things that I want to change, but my focus isn't on those. My focus is on like kind of this life that I want to lead. And when people are trying to mimic the way somebody else feels, or they want you to tell them exactly, you wake up at 8:05, and then at 8:07 you need to write out this script, and at 8:09 you need to be saying these affirmations, and you need to count the affirmations that you say them 10,000 times per day today and 5,000 times tomorrow. Don't mess this up. Like, that's where it's fake, and you're convincing yourself over and over that I don't have it, so I have to do this thing to get it. And it's crappy, right? Because it's confusing. And it's confusing until you have the epiphany moment that you're like, oh, now I get it. And I think that's why it's hard for people to learn from others or feel like YouTube coaches or people online or books or Neville or who else was not explaining it enough, because they want such a guide that tells them exactly how to feel. And nobody can actually describe to you exactly how to feel.
They can't. Just kidding. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, that's, you know, I'm glad that you said all that. And that's really what I've been discussing that a lot recently
Hmm.
on my channel and the last podcast episode I did, where, you know, growing up, especially like in school, we're taught all these objective truths, you know, and like it comes to science, we're used to like objectivity and this is true, this is false. Well, this experience for I think everybody is subjective. So in other words, you're going to hear all these people talk about it,
Right.
but you have to process it subjectively yourself to understand it. And that is going to look different for each person. And it doesn't matter if you're all fed the same instructions. You have to interpret the instructions for yourself and process
Exactly.
them yourself. It's different than like a math equation where there's like you're going to come out with the same solution. It's like whatever you hear is then going to be processed through your mind, your past experiences, your past successes, your past traumas, all that stuff. And what's going to come out is you know how you process it, you know. But again, this is why I think all these teachings basically point to the same thing, is because it's very hard to articulate that subjective
Hmm.
process and objectify it. And so there's all these people trying to give you a, you know, a in a, you know, like this is an objectified law, for instance. We hear everybody saying law, right? Or like this is the
Right.
truth. But in my opinion, it's all subjective. And it's like you take all that stuff and you swallow it, and you know it nourishes you, and then you change. But how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen, it's going to be different for each person. I think that's wonderful. That's really, I think, a good thing. But it's why a lot of people get disappointed in these teachings and in the advice they hear, because it's not like, all right, do this, and then it's going to happen. It's never
Right.
like that. Never like that, you know, in my opinion, for long term, at least sustainably.
Yeah, I agree, because until you get that piece figured out of like how to actually shift your state. And it's, I mean, in my opinion, this is exactly what Neville was talking about. You have to have the epiphany kind of wake up to understand it. But, you know, he talks about dwelling and where you continue to dwell, and that, you know, and he actually doesn't, a lot of people are like, well, you know, he talks about like in moods and inner talking about never feeling a certain way. And I've never read it that says you can never feel this bad way, but he does say it as don't dwell there. If you're dwelling constantly against this thing that you want to be or this thing that you want to have, you're kind of canceling yourself out. And this is where the frustration, I think, comes in a lot. And, you know, and then you've got people who are teaching that, well, you just have to do it harder, or you need to write more affirmations, or you need to say them more often. And I'm sure that eventually that stuff works for quite a few people. I just think it's a much more long, frustrating process, and one that's like likely not very sustained. I think that's why in the SP community you see a lot of people who are like, well, I got the message, or I got the text, or, you know, we ended up going out, but then everything crashed again. And it's
Right.
like, well, because you haven't actually changed any belief. You've just had enough emotional drive and like emotional oomph behind something to kind of have this one experience come to you.
Right. And I mean, that's, again, I think that ties into what Neville always talked about and what, you know, my guy Emile Coué always talked about, where you want your willpower and imagination to be in accord.
Right.
And your willpower is very strong. And for this is a great example. Like your willpower can make it so you can like kind of force yourself, for instance, to get like a
Hmm.
text or a date with your SP. But as strong as the willpower is, the imagination overrules it long term every
Right.
single time. And so it's not until you work with the imagination, which is not force, which is actually open and enjoyable to work with if you feel like you can work with it, and if you become more aware of your feelings and let your feelings and thoughts come in and be there and be like, oh, I can work with this thing, then all of a sudden your imagination is more amenable to working with your willpower together, as opposed to
Right.
those two clashing. You know, the will, just when we use our willpower, at least according to Neville, according to Coué, and according to a lot of these great manifesting teachers, it's not going to work long term. I mean, that's more of like a self-improvement angle. Like, you know, you just will it to be, and there's something to it. But I would argue in the self-improvement field, the people who are very successful in self-improvement, it's because they also have a great imagination. So their will is working it lined up with their imagination. If you just work hard and to the grindstone, but you imagine that you're failing, you're still going to fail. You
Right.
know, even externally, if you have some success, inwardly, you're going to feel like a failure. So, you know, this is the good news of the Bible in some ways, if we interpret it from this Neville perspective, is that it's your imagination that's your savior right now. And you already
Right.
have what you want. You know, it's already, you already are free. It's done. You know, it's
Yeah, you just have to
accepting
choose
that.
it.
You just have to
Yeah.
choose it, you know, tossing the sickle and reap the rewards right
Hmm.
now. But again, one thing to say it as this, like, you know, Cecilia and Tim are talking about this, another thing to subjectively do it and experience
Right.
it, because we all make mistakes and mess up and do things wrong. And it's like, again, like you said, you can beat yourself up over that, but then that's your state you're coming from. It's your state
Right.
of like, oh, I'm doing something wrong, or like which is similar to like a state of like, oh, why isn't it here yet? That's a
Hmm.
state. While the state that Neville and people like him are always talking about is a state of like fulfillment. And if you don't want to use Neville's language of like it's already done, other very good language to use is like it's coming, it's going to
Right.
happen, it's inevitable, like it's all good, it's on its way. That's the kind of, you know, because when you say something is on its way, you picture it in your mind of it being done already, and it's all good. It's what it comes down to, as opposed to, oh, it's not working, why isn't it here yet? Very different states. um you know, the state of lack and not having, and why won't things change, to the state of expecting, oh, it's going to happen, or it's already here in some way.
Well, and I've kind of also thought, and I actually put this in a text, I haven't done a video about it, but I think that I will probably here soon, is that you can still, like, some people are like, well, what about folks that worry all the time, or they're like kind of always concerned? And there's this very subtle shift, at least in my theory on this, is that an emotional charge is really kind of what it needs. So you have this like feeling, and you can actually trigger something to happen from like one emotionally kind of charged event. And it doesn't have to
Yes.
be, it's not forced, right? It's just like natural emotional feeling. And sometimes that emotional feeling might be one of, worry, or like, what if this doesn't happen? But I think the difference is that it's a very gray area between, I'm concerned that this won't happen, but like my, overall kind of belief is still that I'm working towards it, that it's coming, like that, even if I'm worried and I've got this like emotionally charged worry kind of going at it, or annoyance, or something that's deemed a negative type of emotion,
Right.
it still happens for you. And there's a difference then between dwelling in an actual belief that nothing ever works out for you, you're completely unlucky, because it's wherever like that kind of, I almost picture it as like a zap. So like whichever one gets the zap of your emotional energy, and it doesn't have to be this like conscious, forced, continuous
Right.
focus on it. It can be kind of this one-time thing. And I don't know how it works, right? Like I just know that I have these like theories and thoughts about it, but and nobody knows how it works. They all like, that's the thing that I think frustrates me
They
the most
don't.
sometimes in the community. I know, well, maybe they do, and I just haven't met them yet. Because what
You
bothers me
just
is the
know the
people
wrong
in the
people.
community, yeah, is that they say it like they know without a doubt. And
Oh
there
yeah.
is some it's being vulnerable to say, I don't actually know. This is what's worked for me. These are the kind of epiphanies that I've had. And like I said, I believe epiphanies are, God literally like kind of
Yeah.
bopping you upside the head, like think about this for a minute. Um, but that doesn't mean that I actually know, and my thoughts could change and my feelings could change because they're all from the state that I'm within now. So like the way that I think about this stuff now is completely different than the way that I did, a couple years ago when I was like knee deep in the Neville Goddard community on Reddit. And so, but I really think this like emotional charge, even if it is what somebody considers a negative emotion, can still end up having the outcome that you want. And that's why you need to take away this like, oh, I have to feel gratitude or I have to feel positivity all the time, because I just don't think that's the answer.
Yeah. It's something about the predominant charge, the predominant
Right.
feeling, and what Murphy, Joseph Murphy said about, when you're 51% convinced it's going to happen, right? You don't have to be
Hmm.
100% or close to 100%. I mean, something that helps me, has always helped me since I got into this stuff, is like, I just try to take everything away
Right.
when I can. Like, it's like, um, Lester Levinson, who's another great manifesting type teacher, he's got that great saying, like, thought is limitation.
Hmm.
Like, he's like, you're a limitless being, in the sense where, like, if you don't think about, if you can't think about something positively naturally, where like you feel good about it and you're so excited to think about it or feel so grateful for it being there, if you can't do that, just try to wipe out everything. I mean, that's another, I'm not saying this is the approach. I'm just
Right.
saying that's another way to look at it, is that when we wipe our state clean, our slate, I said state, but that's interesting too. Like when we clean our, like when we're just here, right, and we feel more okay being here, that's kind of like a fulfilled expectant state, right there. And then
Right.
you don't have to put the focus as like, I'm going to get this thing, I'm going to get this thing. It can be a very light touch. Again, Richard Dotz talks about light touch manifestations, where like, if you're in this kind of like neutral, things are good, things are going to work out state, a lot of the time, you don't necessarily have to have a huge charge behind something for it to happen.
Right.
Likewise, you can have, a lot of thoughts saying this isn't going to happen, but if you're not overly reactive or affected by those thoughts, you're like, you know what, it's all right, it's still going to happen. Like
Yeah.
that, these are all just, again, it's a very gray area, that I love that
And
you
it's
said
not
that.
like
I
a
always,
focus of like it's going to happen. I think this is what I kind of found, is that that focus of even considering that is in my experience has been
yeah.
removed.
Yeah, and that can be a very lackful focus.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, it can become very lackful quickly. I think most people, well, I don't know, I've certainly experienced that. When I
Yeah.
mean, I always talk about that, like when I'm like, oh, it's going to happen, I'm thinking about it. It's like, dude, you're thinking about it too much. Exactly
Hmm.
like you were saying earlier. Like, if you were expecting of it happening or already being in my life in some way energetically, I wouldn't be thinking about it that much. Probably,
No,
I don't
it
think
wouldn't.
about my SP, my wife, like having her with me all the time, because I'm with my wife. It's like I'm already married. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Like, what this doesn't make sense, right? So it's, it gets tricky though when you want something, you desire something, and it seems so far away. Because what
Hmm.
Neville's saying and people like him are saying is, well, you already have it now.
Right.
It's already there, and
You're
it's
just
in
not
some.
essentially aligned with it yet.
Right, exactly. So it's tricky. And I do want to comment briefly, just to continue my Neville bashing. This will, for long time watchers of the channel, this will inevitably end sometime soon. But it does blow me away, the people, not just in the Neville community, but in general, this manifesting community, these know-it-alls.
Yeah.
So, I click on these commenters, some who just give you this definitive thing. This is how it works. I'm like, oh, maybe they've posted videos about this. No, they've left like just these insane comments and never actually shared this stuff or what. It's craziness. It's narcissism. I don't understand it. People like that, shout out to you. You can leave a comment bashing me on this video if you want.
Get ready. I'm going to leave one. Just kidding.
That's fine. But yeah, let's go over this quote one more time. If we've got a couple minutes left, if you want
Yeah.
to, I just think it's so interesting. Again, this is from 5 Lessons. Neville said, although today we speak of a third dimensional and a fourth dimensional focus, do not think for one moment these ancient teachers were not fully conscious of these two distinct centers of thought within the minds of all men. They personified these two, and they tried to show man that the only thing which robs him of the man he could be is habit. Although it is not law, every psychologist will tell you that habit is the most inhibiting force in the world. It completely restricts man and binds him and makes him totally blind to what otherwise he should be. The only reason you and I are functioning as we are today and not aware of the greater outlook is simply because we are creatures of habit, and habit renders us totally blind to what otherwise we should see, but habit is not law. It acts as though it were the most compelling force in the world, yet it is not law. That's why we love Neville. Wow, that's very,
Yes.
very powerful.
It's extremely, especially when you really just step back, stop listening to a bunch of other people, like myself included, like figure out what it is that you want to work on and start kind of working on this stuff. And the more that you take a look at like your daily habits, I mean, it's like even Dr. Joe Dispenza's book where it's like breaking the habit of being yourself. It's because when you fall into these habits, you are continuing not just a physical habit, but an emotional thought process habit. And so you end up just kind of staying stuck essentially and staying in the same spot because you're continuing these same cycles. But like Neville says, it's not law. You can actually change your habit. You can change any habit that you have, whether it's, an addiction to your phone, it's an addiction to smoking cigarettes, drinking, not treating people well, bashing yourself, etc. There are steps, and you just have to figure out the best steps for you to get from point A to point B. And embody more of this person that you want to be. And you can use, like we were talking about earlier, you can use your habits that you're compelled to do as a check-in point of where you're actually dwelling and what you're feeling and how you see things right now.
Yes, definitely.
It's a reflection of your state.
It is a reflection of your state, and use it as a reflection of your state. I want to mention to people too, I'll put the link above, the success indicator of W. Clement Stone. We have a playlist at this point. That might be a valuable tool for some people listening to this, just because it's all about checking your behavior each day.
Oh,
He's got
good.
that great saying that we have a lot of us, most of us have a pretty easy time being honest with others, but we have a hard time being honest with ourselves.
Very true.
And so, Stone knew what he was talking about. He's one of the more successful people that lived in American history and who understood these imaginative ideas about using the subconscious. So, the other thing there too, Cecilia, you mentioned is that what both of us might take for granted, but if people listening maybe aren't thinking about it this way, when we say figure out, why you're doing this and changing it, what state you're coming from, you can use your imagination. You can use your wonderful human imagination to do that. That's the whole thing. That's what's so cool about this. It's not like, okay, like I need to take this huge action to change this behavior. Like looking at, you can use your imagination to make it much easier and more manageable and an easy action, and maybe even a enjoyable action. You know what I mean? Like, so, if you can stop looking at your phone in the morning, for instance, you can instead be visualizing or meditating instead, or doing something enjoyable with that time. And, you can, but that's not even a good example. But the idea is that this can be an imaginative correction, that like by correcting things with your imagination, it's much easier than using willpower and being like, I have to try hard to fix all these things about my life. Just assume that it's changing or is going to change, and it will start to shift.
Well, and I kind of try to also teach folks to do it in conjunction. Like you can, and your phone is kind of a perfect example. You can do things like you can say, okay, I'm going to identify as someone who is productive in the morning. Like my ideal self, like if you take a look and it's like, okay, here's who I ideally want to be. And if, am I behaving now in alignment with how that person would behave? And part of that could be like, no, even to something very small of looking at your phone first thing in the morning. So create an interruption for yourself. Like you can physically do things to, like take action, which that's going to have to be a different video altogether, but like take action, to change and shift this for yourself. Now you're using your imagination because you're shifting your identity and the way that you view yourself, and you can use these techniques for that. But then you're also actually here in this world that we live in, whether you want to believe that it's real, the 3D, whatever kind of deal it is, this is where we are, this is where we're living. And like put a sticky note on your phone, stop doing this. Or put a glass of water instead of where your phone is. Charge your phone in the other room. Like there's things that you can do to say, this is the person that I want to be. I'm not there yet. Okay, whatever, that's fine. Who cares? Like it's fine. And start working towards that through, pairing this stuff of like, yeah, I'm going to use my imagination that it's coming and it's shifting. And I'm also going to do something physical in this world for myself to align better with that. And it was
Yes.
that combination that I feel like has really shifted things for me of like, okay, now I'm not really kind of waiting for something. I'm almost creating a little bit of my own compulsion, but it's, I don't know, it's like chicken or egg kind of deal, whatever, but you can combine the two, which I
Yeah,
think is helpful.
that's huge. I mean, thank you for giving a good example after my very scattered example, because that's exact you. I mean, for people who don't listen to Cecilia's podcast, she always talks about stuff like this on her podcast. I knew you would save me there. It's got there should be an imaginative quality, probably coupled with an action, a
Yes.
physical action. Yeah, that's how this stuff works better for most of us, at least. I know we were texting about, I did a video last week quoting from Christianity and autosuggestion, where they were saying, once you assume something, you should immediately act upon it. Like if you assume that you are getting healthier, you should immediately be like, I'm getting strength, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to take a walk as opposed to sitting down. It's not like, I think people, they go to the state of fulfillment with some of these Neville exercises and they're like, oh, it's done. But then they don't do anything about it and they feel down in the dumps again later that day, as opposed to immediately coupling it with an action that reinforces the idea. So for instance, you start imagining, oh, wouldn't it be great not to check my phone in the morning? Give me more, I'll have more freedom. I won't be as distracted. And then you don't just stop there and leave your phone by the mantle. You put a glass of water there and drink the water and don't have your phone near you and keep on. So little things like that. Anyway, Cecilia always has a bunch of good examples of that on her podcast. And really, I mean, you link habits together with this Neville stuff very interestingly, and it just is fascinating when we put it in the context of these Neville quotes here about habit. It's just really interesting, and the other thing that I just want to throw out there too is like, what we're suggesting to ourselves is just habitual, right? So it's like there's that saying, I think Israel Regardie said it. They also say it in Christianity and autosuggestion, like faith is basically just suggestion done right. Like if you have faith, you're suggesting to yourself, this is going to happen. It's okay. Like God is going to save us, or this is going to work. That's actually habitual suggestion that you're making, if you want to break it down in that way. And then if you do that, the magic happens because of that. The faith is made full, again, in an entirely different state that you're coming from when you're doing that, as opposed to be like, I don't think this is going to happen. No, this is definitely not going to happen. Why hasn't this happened yet? Two different highly contrasting states, one fulfilling, the other one unfulfilling.
Yeah, I mean, if you get up and just decide like, oh, I'm going to be a healthier person, but now I'm just going to go sit on the couch and there's nothing, even though, and I'm going to guess anybody who actually sat down and was like, no, I view myself as healthy, your compulsion within, like right after that, is to get up and go do something. It's not to sit down and fall into the same habit. So it's when you ignore the compulsion and you're like, I'm going to say, I'll do it tomorrow. Well, nope, now you've just shifted yourself right back to your old state. And I think that's kind of a lot of it too. So yeah, I agree. Definitely. Give yourself small wins.
Small wins, exactly. And realize this should be gentle self-work. It's inner work, and you don't have to accomplish everything in one day or 3 days.
Exactly.
If you gradually improve, if there's an aspect of your life you want to improve, you just gradually work on improving it. And understand, sometimes you take 2 steps forward and take 1 step back. Sometimes you take 2 steps forward and take 3 steps back, but it's okay, because then you take 4 steps forward. And it's all good. Gentleness gentleness towards oneself can't be, that's something that should always be reinforced, because it's so important, and we're so prone to beat ourselves up and not give ourselves credit for doing the inner work. And
it just feels so much better.
Yes, totally. Well, thank you again for coming on, Cecilia.
Thank you. I like doing these.
Yes, we love to have you. And where can we reach you? Where's the best place to reach you besides YouTube, and YouTube too? We'll link to YouTube.
So definitely the best place, if you want to shoot me an email, it's unleashinghappiness@ceciliahendricks.com. Essentially across any real channel, you can either find me by name, Cecilia Hendricks, or like my podcast and Instagram and YouTube, sorry, I'm about to cough, is all under Unleashing Happiness.
Great.
So definitely best place.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you as always. And
Thank you.
yeah, if you have questions for Cecilia, shoot her an email. And until next time, assume the state. Bye, everybody.